throughout the debate of, we're now on budget 3.0. And throughout this debate, there's a missing link because people do not understand what the debate is about. The debate is not about the main baseline of allocation to departments. That is intact. Since February 4, that has been intact. In other words, the baseline to departments has always been, as we have said in the medium-term budget policy statement. What has been the problem? The debate has been about by how much should we increase, in particularly the social services. Let me repeat myself. The debate has been how much should we increase the budget, in particular to counter the social services, which has been, in our view, a challenge. Why has that been the case? The DG of National Treasury, the DG in the Presidency, the DG of COCTA, the DG of Public Service and Administration constitute a team called the Technical Team of the Budget. And that grouping analyzes submissions by departments. In their analysis, they say, despite the allocations that are intact in department, there's still going to be a major shortfall in those social services. And therefore, what we've been trying to do, particularly starting with 19th of February, with 2% VAT, coming back in the 12th of March with 5%, has been to say by how much to increase in order to close that gap. So in March, we wanted to close that gap by 232 billion rand over the MTF. In this budget, we're still trying to close that gap by 180.1 billion rand. What does that mean? What it means is that there's no major shift on the baselines of departments, except some few. Again, those who are affected largely by the increase. For instance, we're intending to increase, limited by Treasury. Treasury's increase is as a result of the increase in SARS, because SARS' budget comes through vote 8 of National Treasury. The Defence Force budget, and to some extent Home Affairs, have been affected by the increase, not their baselines. So I wanted to make that point. The second point I want to make, in the whole of this thing, are we still committed to our fiscal targets? The answer is yes. We have been made a commitment not to a specific figure, but to a peak. We said in this current fiscal year, debt to GDP will peak, and thereafter we will see a downward trend. Indeed, debt is peaking this financial year, but it's beginning to a downward trend. And the higher number than the 12th of March at the moment is occasioned, mark that point, by the change in the GDP number, because debt is sensitive to that number. But we're still growing the primary surplus. The deficit is also declining as well, showing in the numbers. The deficit is also declining. So our fiscal sustainability remains the core What also remains the core is the change in the composition of expenditure. That composition of expenditure, as you will see, infrastructure spending is growing. In terms of the economic classifications, in terms of the classification, whatever you call them, infrastructure spending is the fastest growing expenditure on the budget. If I'm correct, the last time, I don't know, in the March budget, we were sitting at 8 point something. I don't know what number I was sitting now.
11.1.
11.1. So, if you ask me, that commitment remains. So overall, what is this message? Overall, what is this message? The message is we're committed to growing the economy, the budget of the pie to infrastructure, committed to macroeconomic stability, committed to providing social services, and the budget is redistributive. As you can see, it remains redistributive, 61% of non-interest expenditure going into the social wage. That's my story. But the DMs have got to say something, because the department has said most of my work is likely to go off-ramp. I suspect my off-ramp is still online, but the DMs have got to say something. Over to you, DM.
After you.
Oh, after me, okay. No, good morning. Yeah, still morning. I think the minister has covered the core messages of what he will be articulating this afternoon. Firstly, that this budget invests in infrastructure, and over the next 3 years we'll be spending 1 trillion in investing in the infrastructure. The only point I want to make or add insofar as this issue around infrastructure is concerned is that we don't want to rely only on the budget for infrastructure investment. And it's for this reason that we are making it easier for the private sector to invest in infrastructure. The PPP regulations, we are reviewing them. We've actually reviewed them to enable the private sector to invest with ease insofar as infrastructure is concerned. The second point is that as a consequence of the structural reforms that we've been undertaking in energy, telecommunication, water, as well as rail infrastructure, or rail or freight logistics, we have also set conditions for the private sector to get their money flow into infrastructure. I don't want to bore you with what we have done in the energy space, where we've liberalized the sector and creating conditions now, further conditions for the private sector to invest in transmission infrastructure through, amongst other things, credit guarantee scheme. In the freight, logistics, we said we need third-party access on our rail. And the minister last year of transport, she announced the network statement, which I'm told that now about 97 operators have applied to get into the rail infrastructure operation. And the Department of Transport as well, they've also issued requests for information from the private sector to indicate what would it take for them to invest in the infrastructure itself, including ports. And by the end of November, they should, I think they will be in a position to move towards a request for proposal through a PPP unit that they basically established there. I'm just making the point that we're not going to rely only on the budget to invest in infrastructure. We're also enabling conditions for the private sector, setting right incentives for the private sector to flow into our infrastructure, including water. I've mentioned energy as well as roads. I think, Minister, you have covered maybe the spending reviews, because one of the things that we've learned out of our attempt to increase VAT has been the question of what are you using this money for? Are the efficiencies in the manner in which we are spending this money? And National Treasury, we've been undertaking spending reviews from 2000, if I'm not mistaken. The key issue is how those spending reviews are treated by accounting officers and departments. There's so much we can do from our side, but departments are responsible for cutting fat and waste in the way in which they spend public funds. And the President, working with National Treasury, will also be working hard to make sure that we cut waste based on the scientific work that we've done on the spending reviews, which basically identify a lot of waste. So maybe I've covered this issue around the reforms, that we are also enabling the reforms to be undertaken within government through Operation Vulindlela. So I think those are a few additions that I would want to make insofar as the core messages are concerned. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister and DM. I think a few other critical points to take away from this is, firstly, that we are, and you see very clearly in the documents, aware of the global risks that have been heightened, and that all these weaknesses reinforce that we have to get our fiscal house as strong as possible. And so running the primary surplus at a growing rate does mean that we were able to build the necessary fiscal shock absorbers to both meet our social expenditure demands as well as continue to build the buffers for any future shocks, which is quite important. Critically, and the Minister pointed this out, is that the departments retain their baselines and critical service delivery areas are protected. The provincial baselines, remain intact as well. So those are quite important, and in the budget itself, the additions to health and education are listed. And as DM Masanda rightly pointed out, the spending reviews have identified savings, and a new series of spending reviews will broaden the focus to sectors rather than just programs. And of course, a ghost employee audit is being undertaken as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So can I ask a question too? Are there any sitting arrangements in specific seats arranged in Johannesburg? There's that gentleman sitting on my right over there. He normally sits there.
Thanks, Minister. Thank you so much. I'm now going to open the opportunity for questions. I'm going to do it differently this time. I'm going to start in Pretoria. Is that okay?
Thank you. We'll start with a question from Reuters.
Greetings. I'm Sunda Parakozo from Reuters. My question is on the public employment program. So the May version says an additional 8.8 billion rand has been allocated for this year. So I just wanted some clarity on whether it's in addition to the 4.6 billion rand proposed in March or a new proposal altogether. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks to you. Next is Citywire.
Okay.
Just wanted to ask, the 77.4% debt to GDP ratio.
What's that?
Would that be the highest ever
Citywire.
for the government's?
Citywire.
Okay. Highest ever? Or highest since when?
Next was Helmo.
Okay.
Helmo?
I was asking if you got the question because I couldn't get it.
In terms of Eskom municipal debt, what arrangements are being made on that? And then for the Deputy Governor, how far are we along in changing the inflation target?
Thanks, Amo, and then as Pelele and then Naledi.
Thanks.
Good morning, greetings everyone. Thanks, Minister. First question is, what is your general assessment about the delays in passing the budget? Because we've seen in other provinces they are struggling to pay suppliers, especially in KZN, because there is a wait that is they have to wait for the National Treasury to pass the budget. So the question is, what has been your general assessment of, and is there any apology that is coming from National Treasury about this impact? And secondly, since the early retirement program is being reduced from 11 billion to 5.5 billion, how many workers are now being targeted previously from 30,000? Thank you.
Thanks, Sergio. The last question is from Naledi, SABC.
Good morning. My question is with regards to the fruitless and wasteful expenditure and the savings thereof that you've now identified. It seems you've known about these wasteful expenditures from about 2013. Why has it taken over a decade for you to mention as National Treasury that you'll be making savings on this, and to have instead tried to increase that before looking at that option? And my other question is with regards to the consultative process that government said that it would be undertaking, and we were told that an announcement would be made before the taking of this budget about how that new consultative process would now be happening. So can we get some clarity? Perhaps I've missed it, but I haven't heard anything on that yet. And then finally, my question is with regards to the funding for the provinces in terms of the conditional grants that they get. In the case where they are not able to adequately substantiate why they have not been able to use some of the funding allocated by national, what happens to that money? Is it rolled over to the next year, or will this now be considered as that saving under the wasteful expenditure that you've now identified? Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Now I'm going to hand over to the Minister and panel to respond.
Maybe I should, being older than the two DMs, I tend not to hear most of what's being said. Maybe I'm deaf, I'm old. Can you guys, and also DG, attempt, some of these things are operational, for instance, the Eskom debt, relief, why are they, all of that stuff. Can you guys, and employment, public employment, can you guys attempt to deal with that? I'll deal with the early retirement. And the last, deal with the last question, she had a lot of questions, not one.
Maybe, Minister, you also want to deal with the issue that came from Siphelele on what is your assessment on the delay of the passing of the budget?
Can I get?
What is your assessment of the delay on the passing of the budget?
Can I deal with that immediately?
Yeah.
I think there are a couple of issues which even a lot of journalists in this room are missing. We also miss them. With the elections and outcome of the elections with no majority party, there has been in the past a particular form of managing the budget. With the outcome of the elections, with everybody now being involved, I think part of our side, on our side was not to anticipate how the different political parties are likely to deal with this question. That's the first point. And we say, moving forward, we need to develop, I think that's what the lady at the end is asking, a consultative process. What is the best form of developing a consultative process moving forward is what we want to think about. So there has been a delay precisely because I think even in Parliament, people got excited, oh, now we can amend the budget. But what does it mean in practice? Because the law says in terms of Section 8 of that law, there are certain things people have got to do in amending the budget. And people got excited in amending the budget, but none of them paid attention to that issue. And as a result, everybody kicked to touch. Those others went to court, others kicked to touch and said, no, Treasury, we'll make some submissions to you for 30 days. I think that's what people miss. That's what the resolution of Parliament, it says, in 30 days' time, you must come back to us after you've listened to a number of proposals from different political parties. Those proposals are supposed, by the way, to say, we don't want that, but we will provide you with alternative proposal to replace that. That was quite an interesting thing to do. We're all excited, and one party came to us with 100 billion rand, which was a fascinating proposal, if you can say. 100 billion. We sat with the DG, with the party, and said, let's go down with all of these 100 billion we're talking about. All is history, but it didn't make sense for for today. So, fascinating proposal. Some of them make sense for the next financial year. We'll evaluate them. So that process on its own has been a learning process for everybody and therefore had to delay the budget. And as such, everybody said, oh, the Minister of Finance has messed up and he must go. But we've not looked at the nitty-gritties of how that process is so complicated, even for political parties. I was talking to one political party yesterday and bumped into them in the passage. I said, have you guys learned that you yourself should have done a couple of things in terms of the act? He says, he didn't say, he said, no, it's your GNU partners. Probably not part of this. So what is the message? The message is that we have all learned the process is cumbersome. And it has got to be cumbersome because the manner in which it was tailored in such a manner that it should not be easy to just sit down and say, we're amending the budget. It should be difficult because people have got to comply with that. Treasuries also have to comply with fiscal prudency, macroeconomic stability, all of those things. Anybody who amends the budget has got to think carefully about all of those issues. So it has not been an easy task for all of us. We've got to learn in dealing with all of these political parties. I remember one political party in the Division of Revenue came to the meeting and said, okay, take 15% from provinces and take it to local government. Now, that makes sense. But have you thought about the fact that, in fact, provinces are intensive, they've got labor-intensive spending. Have you thought about that? On education, on health, and so on and so on. So we're all in a learning phase. I think moving into the next financial year, I think we'll be able to manage quite effectively. I'm quite confident. And that process is going to start as soon as we conclude this budget. And we've got tight timelines. If you look at it, the NCOP will be dealing with the appropriation bill on the 30th of July. That's the danger line. Because outside the 30th of July, departments have got to spend only 10% of their budget. And my own reading is no department can spend 10% because the wage bill, no department has got a wage bill less than 10%. So what that means, if we don't finish the budget from the end of August, we're going to experience what the Americans are experiencing, which is fascinating, closing government. And one MECs we have discussing in the Budget Council said to me, it means we're going to close government. I said, I've not taken leave. That's going to be a nice thing, a nice period for me to take leave.
Thank you.
You can answer.
Linked to that question was the issue of KZN spending. I'm not sure whether did you want to deal with it or the OEG must deal with it.
But mischievous, okay.
No.
That'd be mischievous. I'm saying everybody can spend budget now, 40% of your budget. To say you can't spend is being mischievous, to say leaders, but DG, you can deal with it.
Yeah, no, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Minister, I think you've covered that both the PFMA as well as the Division of Revenue Act has a provision for spending to continue in the absence of a budget being passed. So that's certainly is not a constraint on the ability of provinces to spend. Just to run quickly through some of the other questions on public employment, you can find the amount in table 5.2, which is in the budget overview. The amount for this year is 4.5 billion. What we have done is, if you go back to the budget review, is that there was also a provisional allocation for the 2 outer years in table 5.3 of the budget review. And if you go back there, you can see that provisional allocation in the 2 outer years has been removed pending the conclusion of the work around active labour market programs and the public employment review that's happening implemented as part of this budget cycle. There was a question about is 77% the highest debt to GDP ratio? I don't have the data for earlier than 1994, but certainly since 1994, around 77% debt to GDP is the highest. But as the Minister mentioned in his opening remarks, for the last 3 years or so, we have explicitly targeted a debt to GDP peak in 25-26. We haven't targeted a level because of how sensitive that peak is to nominal GDP revisions, but it's a very important milestone for us that we are able to achieve the debt to GDP peak this year. There was a question about early retirement. We've halved the provision for early retirement, so that also halves the number of employees that could benefit. Previously we were targeting around 30,000 employees, now it's around 15,000. There's still some work happening in the Public Sector Bargaining Council in order to allow us to implement that, but departments like Defence, who are not bound by those rules, can already start implementing early retirement to deal with their COE pressures. There was a question about the spending reviews which the Minister spoke to, just to make the point that we have not identified fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Fruitless and wasteful has a very specific definition in the PFMA. What this applies to is spending inefficiencies in government. And we've reviewed spending amounting to over 300 billion and identified savings in the region of 30 to 40 billion. And the Minister spoke about the process that we are going to embed as part of this budget process in order to ensure that those inefficiencies can be addressed. Then there was a last 2 questions. The one on municipal debt and the progress there. We continue to track that on a monthly basis and regularly report to Parliament, in particular in the form of parliamentary questions. We had some municipalities that have benefited from a debt write-off. those who have met their conditions. But the biggest challenge still lies around the big defaulters, the top 14 municipal defaulters. And for those municipalities, we are in various stages of discussions with them. Those that persistently do not meet the conditions will be excluded from the debt relief program, which will mean that they will become vulnerable to action by Eskom in terms of potentially attaching their assets, as well as the National Treasury in terms of potentially taking action in terms of the constitutional provisions that allow us to withhold the equitable share. And then finally, unspent, there was a question about unspent funding. As soon as the new the budget is passed and the new fiscal year starts, we start a rollover process with departments, and the outcome of that rollover process is adjudicated upon by the Treasury Committee, which is chaired by the President, and that will then make decisions about unspent funds from the previous year and whether they qualify for rollovers or not. Have I missed anything?
No.
Okay.
I think there is community.
But depending on the grant, some of the grants, if you have the municipality or province is not underspending, depending on which grant we're talking about, we may move it even in year to a province or a municipality that is spending.
Thank you.
No, thanks, Minister. That's an important point, because we do run a stopping and reallocation process where if we identify that there are certain municipalities, for example, who are able to spend faster than others, then we stop grants to some and reallocate it to those who can spend faster, so that we minimize underspending by the end of the year. Thanks.
Thank you, DG. I'm now going to give an opportunity to the Deputy Governor on the inflation question.
Thank you very much. Good morning. So the focus of both the National Treasury and the South African Reserve Bank is to safeguard price stability and to make sure that we protect the purchasing power of consumers. And there is work that we have done. The National Treasury commissioned a macro economic review, and there were a few papers that they commissioned looking at whether the current inflation target range that we have works for us as a country. And where we have landed is that there's broad consensus among us that our range is too wide and out of line with that of our trading partners. At the end of March this year, we also held a workshop where we had a number of discussions. Just to be specific to the question asked, our technical teams have now done work which is quite advanced. And we are at the point where the technical teams will make recommendations to the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Reserve Bank on a way forward. But we are not at this point ready to make any particular announcement today. Thanks.
Thank you, Fondi. Now, thank you, Nsakisi, with your team in Pretoria. I think we've covered everything. If there's anything outstanding before I leave you, please do indicate. I take it you're all happy. I get the silence.
Yes, we are. Sorry, we're just unmuting.
No problem. Thank you very much. Till we meet again. We are now moving over to Cape Town. I'm now going to be taking questions in Cape Town. We're resting with you. So I've identified the first row in that order, number 1, number 2, number 3, and Carol Payton becomes number 4. Thanks.
Hello, it's William from News 24 here.
From what? News 24.
News 24. First of all, Deputy Minister Sarapan, you mentioned spending reviews being broadened to sectors. I'm not sure I've caught the full sentence. Could you please just expand on the plan is in that regard? And then, in the wider context of spending reviews, will any senior DA representatives get a seat at the table in the new plan to embed reviews in the budgeting process? Thank you.
Number 2.
Maya Fisher-French, News 24. My question is for the Commissioner. In terms of the debt collection that has been sort of hoped for, between 20 billion and 50 billion, last year you collected 95 billion rand of outstanding debt. Is this going to be on top of that? So So in other words, will this be an addition? Would you be seeing this at about 115 billion? And are you able at all to comment on a Billions project? Thank you.
Hi Minister, Naina Graham from News 24 here. I wanted to just speak about, you spoke in the budget speech, there's a lot about spending pressures that will happen later this year, which includes PEPFAR. How much does Treasury expect in terms of spending pressures to come from that?
From PEPFAR?
From PEPFAR funding this and the withdrawal of USAID.
Good morning, it's Carol Payton from News 24. Minister, I hear your story about how a growing primary surplus in the future and so on, but this is, I think, the 14th time that the debt consolidation target has moved since 2012, when it was going to be consolidated at 40% of GDP. Are you losing the battle against debt?
Thank you. Can I now hand over to the panel to respond?
I start with you, dear.
With me.
And Commissioner. And who else? What is the question directed to? Oh, yeah, better. Okay.
Okay, thanks. So the spending reviews up to now have been on very specific programs in government. For example, on building leases where we found inefficiency, and these are all publicly available on the GTAC website. So this is going to be broadened going forward to be not just about programs. And in the budget book here, in the review, the overview, we did put in some detail in page, if you'll allow me to find it for a second, on page 3 about the future of spending reviews and what intends to be done there. But critically, it's looking for programs potentially for closures in future and so on for things that are underperforming or don't deliver results. So that is there. In terms of, let me say this, there's the principle of separation of party and state. And so the DA will make submissions as every other political party. The minister mentioned a party that had submitted 100 billion rand worth of things to look at. And there's the principle of separation of party and state that must be adhered to. And so the state will undertake the way we look at this, and we'll accept inputs from across the board. Thanks.
Thank you, Jamie.
Commissioner.
Commissioner?
Thanks, Mara. So let me just say that to start with 95 as the base of last year, if you take just the assumption that the overall revenue in the model will grow by 7%, you should expect that our revenue from the same basis last year should grow to about 101 billion. The additional 1 billion project that the minister has approved and is now in the E&E allows us to employ up to further 1,700 additional debt collectors, ring-fence them as a project. Of that, in the month of April, we already hired 500. Used the month of April to train them, upskill them, and in June, on the 1st of June, we will bring in a further 250. That takes us to about 750 debt collectors. Our estimate is that this ring-fence project should give us at least a further 20 billion. We've given an upper range as well, which is more optimistic, but as a minimum, we therefore target a debt collection from the overall composite debt resources that we employ of at least 120 billion. We will report on that more regularly in the interest of holding ourselves accountable, but also in the interest of transparency, because it is such a high public interest project. The Minister will, I guess by October, be able to learn what level of confidence he can have and apply to that, and then make a decision on how it is accommodated for in revenue projections going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Billions?
Oh, the billions. There's no such thing officially as an billions project. I think it's a project that has been going around. We talk about a overall revenue enhancement program, of which a very specific debt recovery program is implicit. But there's no official terminology.
Thanks, Commissioner. Minister?
Yeah, no, on the peripheral, you want a specific amount.
If you can provide us.
Because the health has been undertaking an investigation of how this thing looks like. They employed one of the top 4 accounting firms. I'm told by Mark that they have given us a submission. I don't, when Mark?
Just in the last 3 days, Minister.
Last 2 days. Are you at liberty to disclose the number?
If you want me to, Minister, the submission is calling for 1.3 billion, and on the research side for us to match a 200 million request from donors with 400 million from government over 2 years. So that we will analyse and get to you, Minister, within the next week or so.
Okay.
Thank you, Minister. There was one more question from Carol.
Yeah, the question, Carol's question is, am I winning the battle? The answer is yes. You know, it's interesting. I was asking the same question in the department, kind of a devil's advocate. I was saying, in October, we picked at a different number. In March, we picked at a different number. Now we're picking at a different number. If I'm sitting there, an investor, will you say, are you guys not shifting the goalpost? I think if you look at this latest figure, it's not as a result of any fiscal slippage. It is as a result of the GDP changes, as DG was saying, that sensitivity debt to GDP ratio. So because of the changes on the GDP, to test that, whether we're winning the battle, is whether is first, to win the battle, there must be a political and normal debate within the team in my department budget office that are dealing with the fiscal framework and saying fiscal consolidation for its success is a political economic question. Is there a political acceptance within the system that that is a major problem and you have got to deal with it? In that sense, there's overwhelming now majority in cabinet that this is a major issue and it has got to be attended to, and you can't increase borrowing any further. In that sense, from a political perspective, the battle is won. What we've got to, are we able then to pin it down into the numbers? And as you can see now with the primary surplus, with reduction in deficit now, not increasing borrowing. So all of that are an indication that the battle is being won. For me, then the numbers are merely a manifestation of that battle. I would put it in that way.
Thank you, Minister. We have about 15 minutes, so what I'll do, I'll change an approach to ensure that we are able to accommodate each and every one. So I'm going to go to the second row, where Mkokeli is sitting, and just see if there are any colleagues who have questions, and then I'll do it like that up until I get to the end, and then that's how we'll end the briefing. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So can I take questions from the second row? We are number one. Bloomberg, you have nothing? Nothing, that's cool. So I'll move over to the third row. Third row, nothing. Claire, number 2, number 3, and then number 4. Thanks, we'll take it in that order. Nkokeli?
Thank you, Claire. Mr. Nkokeli, I appreciate the opportunity. If Minister, I was take you back to the fiscal consolidation. If you could just explain and educate me and probably others as well in terms of your approach to it and how, and I see it as almost a religious thing, but how your approach to this has shifted, or in the politics, cabinet, South African politics, in the past 3, including this time, including the budget. Has anything changed in your own approach to this region of fiscal consolidation? I sort of know that I can vouch for you, that you completely, it is your religion, and it's also the politics a religion. Maybe DG, you could help us as well. The budget has never been done 3 times in 3 months. What does it mean for your staff, your executives, most junior people? How tough has it been? What does it mean for the confidence that your staff have in the system? They still believe by the National Treasury and the politics of the new coalition era? Are you able to retain your staff? Are we going to see an exodus as we've seen in the past? What are you doing around that in coping with the reality of coalition politics? Thank you.
Thanks. Number 2.
Hi, Claire Bisseka from the Financial Mail. Minister, you say that you're winning the battle against debt, political battle, and the rise in the debt ratio is just a manifestation of the reduction in nominal GDP because of the economic climate. But isn't it equally true that you've taken a deliberate political decision to add about 74 billion rand in new money to expenditure, and that is going to have to be funded out of tax increases, which are further going to dampen growth, which of course will have an impact on your debt outcome? Thank you.
Thanks. Number 3.
Good morning, Nokukanya Mdama from Eyewitness News. Just first in addition, please, to Sam's question about whether there's anything to say about the credibility of Treasury, even on the outside, maybe not so much internally. But Minister, you mentioned, of course, this being the first time where we've had the GNU coalition and having to then shift to adjust to having to appease all the GNU partners. Is there a question there about credibility? But then also there's quite a bit of an emphasis this time around on the impact of the trade wars that we see currently. Can we just get some comment on that, particularly now with the South African delegation in the US, with the talks with President Donald Trump? Are you privy at least to any trade deals that are on the table that you think could perhaps reverse or slow the effect that you're expecting from the trade wars in terms of growth for us? And then a last one was, please, for the Deputy Governor, just still on the issue of what we're seeing on the global scale, the impact. Then you're going into an MPC meeting later this month. What do you imagine, or how do you imagine that's going to change some of the conversations that the MPC is having in this latest policy rate decision that we'll have at the end of the month? Thank you.
Thanks. Number 4.
For me, I just actually would like, I appreciate if you explain something to me.
Can you identify yourself?
Sorry, Nettie Fullion from Stone Information Refinery. Basically, when I read the review, it said that the baseline for the departments remain mostly the same, but it's the provisional additions that will change. And if I interpreted it correctly, it is a huge cut for health and education, but obviously the baselines, I've noted that there is money for the health sector, and health money for education. So it does say provisional is when certain requirements aren't met. So on a real level, what would be the long-term impact of these provisional additions being reduced? Will we feel it in the next year, or maybe not?
Thank you, Natalie. Over to you, Minister Mpano.
Okay. Kokeli's point, Fiscal consolidation is a contested terrain. And as countries go into fiscal consolidation and move out of it goes into fiscal consolidation depending on an electoral cycle. Not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. That's the first point. The second point, fiscal consolidations, we have got to do either on one of the two sides or both. The accepted norm for fiscal consolidation is on the expenditure side. In other words, counting expenditure is what mostly probably the IMF and everybody will advise you to do and what literature would say. It doesn't mean you can't raise revenue as part of fiscal consolidation. So I'm raising this broader political economy question to say, secondly, is the level of consciousness and understanding of the seriousness of, Canada undertook fiscal consolidation when 70% of the population was angry with debt levels in the economy. So it became a manifesto of every political party in Canada. That's what made sense, and everybody said we've got to do so. So I'm raising this thing because it's quite important for the political understanding that when you are doing a fiscal consolidation, you are doing it under conditions not of your own choosing. Because in most cases, including your own political party, some journalists who shall remain nameless asked me a question. We said, is your political party? No, I'm not going to mention. So it's contested session to do this thing because it's a painful exercise to do fiscal consolidation. That's why you would need a political buy-in. To that extent, I can imagine at this stage that everybody understands the seriousness of this thing. As we started by doing a simple thing of putting a slide which says, of the expenditures that we have, where does debt service cost rank? When you look at debt service cost, picking the highest non-interest expenditure spending, you will see when every politician sees that. I've characterized it now, not by saying 2% of every rand. Whereas if you say it's 1.2 billion every day, then it makes sense to everybody that debt service costs are a problem. So in that sense, everybody is becoming conscious on the need to do fiscal consolidation in order to deal with this question. So in that sense, I think we're at home. On the 74 billion, it's incorrect to say all of it will be via tax. We make the point in the speech that we may raise taxes of about 20 billion next year in order to deal with some of the expenditures. But we make the point that that will depend, and we're quite confident, I'm saying so in the speech, having said between 20 and 50, but I'm saying in the speech, I'm quite confident that we may get 35 billion rand from SARS collection, which may not avoid any further increase on the taxes in order to fund these expenditures. I think part of that, we are mindful of the fact that that's what the point we're making. That's why we're talking about expenditure reduced, efficiency in spending. The point we're making is that society is saying we should be the last resort. First and foremost, we have got to start and make sure that we can spend money efficiently, and we as society have value for money before you can come for us for taxes. We appreciate that, and that's why we're saying even the additional expenditures are not going to come through via additional taxes. On the credibility question, I don't say colleagues if they've got an answer in additional point, DG and DMs. On the credibility question, is relative. Credibility to who? If there's somebody I can say, if you ask this person, I'm not credible. But if you were to say, if Standard & Poor undertakes a review of South Africa in the midst of this mess, and they come up with the same finding and with a positive outlook, in my view, that's credibility. That's where the market stands insofar as the budget is concerned. Insofar as somebody who would get an increase of more than inflation for a grant, that's credibility. That's why I'm saying it's relative. I'm quite confident that Treasury's credibility in the institutions that matter for them, mind you, their credibility has got to be largely a market one. Political credibility is mine. We must draw a distinction to that. Insofar as the market, everybody can attach credibility and confidence in these officials, and the Standard & Poor report is a reflection of that credibility. I said that's credibility. As to whether Enoch Godongwana has got credibility, that's a different matter as a politician, okay? Let's draw those two differences. So on the trade wars, there are two issues. There's the global, I think we're talking about two issues, the global effect and the trade deal between South Africa and the USA. Insofar as the global issue is, we, like anybody else, keeping a watchful eyes, and as we have indicated, it's likely to have a negative impact on the South African economy. We're making that point. There's the South African dimension, which has got two issues into it. The first one is the trade component. The second one is what I would call some political economic questions, whether is expropriation, whether Starlink is being discriminated against, and all of those things. Those are separate issues. They may arise in the meeting and the discussion. But from a trade perspective, the South Africans has been engaged, like all other countries. When the Americans said, we're giving you 90 days, South Africa was part of those. And as a result, in between, there has been informal discussion between ourselves and the USA. And those discussions reached a peak yesterday when our colleagues met with the trade representative of the USA. So, and tabled a proposal. Of course, they've been looking for a proposal for us. I would assume that our colleagues did that. MPC, I must protect the deputy governor. When they go to the MPC, the governor refuses to take my call. He doesn't speak to me for 2 weeks to lend credibility to that process. I want to protect the deputy governor. She's here not to talk about the MPC and inflation targeting. Is going to here to pledge solidarity with her minister who's under siege. So let's protect her from that. I won't catch the last question properly. You will add the DG. The last question was likely. Now that you've reduced, let me put it differently. Now that the increase is not as what you would have preferred, but there's still an increase, how are we going to feel the fact that you have not increased it to that extent? Is that the question?
So it's more of a, where does the provisional additions usually come in? When do people rely on them? So for example, you've got your baseline budget for education and your baseline budget for health, and then assuming the provisional additions come in when certain things are met.
Oh,
What do you do with that money in particular, and then seeing that, as you said, we're now not going to be able to get that increase because of that has been cancelled?
No.
What kind of fallout will there be, if any?
I think there are two questions in your, two big questions built in your question. The first one, when will they get the money? What processes? As soon as the Division of Revenue bill is passed by both houses of Parliament, then the money goes to the provinces. The question then, is there a likely fallout? Because, let me just say, for instance, we said to health, when we had 5%, we said 9 billion. But we're no longer saying 9 billion now, we're saying about 5 billion, for argument's sake. Are you saying because you have no longer increasing now, you have reduced your increase by 4 billion rand, is likely to be fallout? Is that the question? Yeah, DJ?
Yeah, I mean, oh, you want to come back?
Yeah, come.
Yeah, no, yes, that is the question. But also, when do provisional additions come into play? What is the difference between a baseline budget and an additional, a provisional addition when it comes to actually paying the bills? So is the one that you need to do anything, and is the other one that you need to do prospective projects? I'm just asking for you to explain that to me.
No, that's an operational thing. If the Division of Revenue is passed tomorrow, when is it likely to flow to a province to be able to pay the bills? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so maybe, I mean, I think you, if I can come in, Minister, you sort of answered the question. But provisional allocations are subject to the recipient departments or entities meeting certain conditions before they can access the funds. That's the short answer. So in the case of, let's take the provisional allocation to PRASA, for example. There's technical work underway to determine exactly how much the rollout of signalling investment in the 3 provinces is going to cost, the timing of that rollout, and the exact final amount, and obviously linked to that some of the procurement issues and so on. We will then build in the allocation letters to departments. We will then say to the Department of Transport, PRASA will be able to get these funds provided they meet conditions X, Y, and Z. Once they meet those conditions, then the Minister of Finance, then the funds flow. So that's the difference between a provisional allocation and a baseline allocation.
Can you translate the same question, not using PRASA, just take the education department?
Yeah, well, the same thing, right? So it's whatever the conditions are that are imposed in the allocation letter to the Department of Basic Education. Once those conditions are met, then the funds will flow. So the baseline allocations are drawn down according to a set schedule that we agree with the department throughout the year.
Apologies, Cleo. Pretoria has
sorry.
lost sound.
Oh, sorry.
Is not on. Thank you.
Apologies. So baseline allocations are drawn down against a set schedule agreed with the department and implemented by the National Treasury, whereas provisional allocations are subject to those conditions being met before they actually are released to the department. So, I mean, the other part of your question was, so what happens when if these provisional allocations are lower over time? So what this budget overview does is that relative to the March budget, it makes those provisional allocations slightly lower, right? And so what we will then be able to do is, at the opportunity provided in the MTBPS, for example, or next budget, we will then have an opportunity to reassess whether those numbers need to be higher or lower, depending on whether the departments have met their conditions, or whether there are new spending pressures that emerge, or whether the spending pressures are not quite as significant as we thought. So I hope that covers it.
Yes, thank you. So it is actually, okay, so it is money that wasn't there originally to begin with, but if I understand correctly, it is having a big impact in the fact that that money isn't there on health and education specifically. If you look at the provisional additions, that's no longer available. The amount is significantly less.
So if you look at, take provincial goods and services budgets in health are under quite a bit of pressure, which is why provincial health departments run accruals. So what does that mean? They have quite a lot of invoices towards the end of the financial year, at the end of March, that they are unable to pay with the previous year's allocation. They then pay it in April. But that then erodes the next year's allocation. So provincial health departments are consistently running accruals. The goods and services additions for provincial health departments is about dealing with those accruals so that over time those accruals can start coming down and you don't have a situation where a provincial health department is using next year's funding in order to settle invoices from the previous year.
Thank you,
Busa's
DG.
hand was up. I don't know if you want to.
Thank you, DG.
There were some other questions.
Busa's hand was up.
Oh, sorry.
Busa, do you want to come in? Are you covered? Okay, DG, can you cover the remaining questions?
What are the remaining questions?
So just to, I think the minister covered the trade scenario question, but just to say that as part of our forecast, we do run upside and downside scenarios, and one of the downside scenarios we have on page 8 is precisely a scenario that caters for what would happen if the trade tensions escalate and what that means for our GDP forecast. So that's covered on page 8. I think the minister covered the other. Just to add, Claire, to your question, 2 points. The one is it's also important to look at what these provisional allocations are for. See that one of the largest additions to table 5.2 is for infrastructure and very specific kinds of infrastructure that we believe are growth enhancing and we believe actually helps us from a potential growth growth perspective. But also the point about the provisional allocations that's being added is to come back to the minister's point about credibility. Often we are asked a question whether our numbers are credible because there are certain spending pressures that we haven't catered for. And then you cater for those spending pressures, and then the question is, well, are your numbers credible because there's some, the debt stabilization peak is 77 instead of 76. And I think it's important to think about credibility in both ways. Credibility is about, are the numbers that you present accurate and defensible because they cater for the different pressures in the system, and are you meeting the fiscal targets that you set out for yourself? Just the last comment is on Sam's question about the department and the impact of the 3 budgets. You can imagine we are all exhausted. We've had to run 3 budgets while running the finance track of the G20, in addition to all of our other responsibilities. So certainly there is quite a lot of fatigue. But I think what's important is we've also learned a lot about the department during this period. And there's a couple of things I think are worth mentioning. The one is we've started for the last couple of years very deliberately building the pipeline in the department and building our depth. So if you have a situation where you table 2 budgets and the head of your budget office goes on sabbatical, which you don't want to interrupt, and the team steps in, an acting head, and delivers a budget of the quality that the one we've delivered today, then I think that tells you something about the depth of the pipeline, and it tells you something about the quality of the institution. I think it's also important to note that there's one of the benefits, as tough as it might be at times of working in the Treasury, is that because you operate at the nexus between politics and finance, there's a lot of resilience that gets built in the way that we do our work. Because it's very public facing, it can be very hard at times, and that builds a kind of, I think, both institutional resilience, but also an individual resilience. And I think finally, we are trying to deal with I think just improving the working environment in general at the Treasury, and this is about the kind of training opportunities we give to the staff, it's about the kind of accommodation we have, and it's just the general working environment to ensure that we can still remain an employer of choice and we can still attract some of the very best talent that we've been able to do. But I think certainly from my point of view, and I'm sure the Minister and the DM shares this, there's an enormous sense, I think, of appreciation and pride in what the team has been able to do over the last couple of months under enormous pressure. I think we take a lot of comfort in that.
Thank you, DG Minister.
Just on this PEF thing, I didn't take it to the conclusion on PEF. If you see, it's in the budget speech as among the issues that are not currently funded in the current fiscal framework. Once it sits like that as soon as Mark and the team have done an analysis and they think that it is justifiable and resources become available, then we can do an adjustment in terms of Section 30, subsection 2 of the PFMA. All of these things that are listed there, I've learned a number of things being here in Treasury. Anything in your speech, Minister, can be funded. Okay, so it works in that way. You know, DG, when you talked about the pipeline, and I looked at Keta, he was smiling right through.
Hello, Keta. All right, we are now coming to the last phase of what we're here about. I'm going to take row number 5 and row number 6, and then I'm going to propose closure. So can I go to row number 5, see if there are any questions? I see everybody smiling, is happy. Number 6, no questions. Wow. Tamar, all right. We're being generous.
Thank you, Claire. I'm sorry, my brain woke up a little late for this one. It's a question to you, Mr. Minister, about the PEPFAR funding. I'm just curious about the size of the amount of money that Health has requested. If I heard you correctly, or if I heard Mark correctly, the figure Health is seeking is 1.3 billion rand. But the Health Minister told Parliament in February that PEPFAR funds expected for the current fiscal year were over 6. So I'm just curious to understand why so much less is being requested.
It's difficult to say without seeing the numbers. Early in the year, Health talked about a number about 7 billion. But they said, to some extent, that figure may be overstated. That's the first point. Secondly, they say the payment structure of PEP was too higher than the public service. For instance, the person who was in charge of PEPFAR was paid higher than the DDG of the department, was reporting the DDG of Health, but paying higher than the DDG. That's the second point. The third point is that I don't know how much of that was not already part of the public funding. Because part of let me just reflect on employees, only 15,000 are not part of the package. Scattered around, some of them scattered around NGOs. The bulk of the 200,000 were already part of the payroll in government. So we need to evaluate all of those numbers before we can come to a correct figure. Yeah, I agree with you. Earlier on, the number was high.
Sorry, Minister, there was just one question that you asked me to clarify, which I didn't, which related to the provisional allocations question. Just to say that those questions funds are able to be released as soon as the Appropriation Act is passed, which has to happen within the first 4 months of the new financial year. Just to clarify that point. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister and the panel, for such a comprehensive briefing. We've now come to the end of the briefing. I'm now going to allow the opportunity for the panel to leave, whilst everyone who we've invited must be seated. And thank you. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.